Hello there. Your professor is going to defend the thesis that everyone's an evolutionist, at least to some extent. Some of you thinking, no way. But yes, I think you don't have to agree with me, but you do need to understand this analysis. I will be asking questions about it on your next test. So how can the professor say that everyone's an evolutionist? Well, I have here, we're talking about origins ideas, and I have here a spectrum. And I believe everyone's ideas about origins can be placed on this spectrum someplace. If you have ideas, if you have never thought about, maybe not, but if you have ideas, they can be placed someplace on this spectrum. What's this end of the spectrum? It's the idea that origins were 100% by natural processes as opposed to no percent supernatural processes. And at this end of the spectrum is the exact opposite idea, the idea that origins were by 100% supernatural activity, no natural processes involved whatsoever. And so before we continue, we probably ought to define terms. What in the world does the professor mean by natural and supernatural? Well, natural processes, the way I'm defining them, are any processes that you would learn about in any type of science class. Biology class, geology class, chemistry class, physics class, etc. Any science class, the natural processes you learn about and study in all those classes. Fact is, we just finished studying a process called natural what? Natural selection. Okay, so then what would supernatural mean? Now, I'm not pushing for the supernatural. I'm just defining what it would be if it existed. And what it would be is contained in the name. Super means above and beyond. Supernatural, above and beyond the natural. If there was any such thing as supernatural processes, they would be above and beyond any process that you would learn about in any science class. As an example, some people believe that at one time there was no life. Well, I believe everybody believes that. But anyway, at one time there was no life, and a supernatural being did something, spoke something, and bam, all of a sudden, all kinds of life, 100, thousands of species and so forth. And so no life, boom, lots of life. If that happened, that could not occur by any process that you would learn about in any science class. That would be a supernatural process. Now, this is a sliding scale. At this end, we have 100% natural going down to 0% natural at this end. At this end, we have 0% supernatural going up to 100% supernatural. And so there are views at each end, and there are views in the middle. Origins ideas about the origin and diversification of life that are in between. Folks that believe it's part supernatural, part natural, if they believe more natural, they'd be down at this end. More supernatural, they'd be down at this end. All right, let's begin. You're requested in your study questions to come up with vegetation diagrams, whatever that means. Well, we've been looking at trees for quite a while. And so there's one tree we looked at a number of times. It was the evolution of everything. Where on this spectrum of ideas does it belong? The origin of everything by natural selection, mutations, natural selection, and so forth. I think it belongs down at this end, does it not? Yes, and so I'm going to make a simple representation, kind of like we did before, of an evolutionary tree. And let's see, we have those scales that we've talked about before. What's this one? Time. Let's see if I can get that right. Time, there we go. And what was this one again? A weak representation of what? Variation. All right, what ideas about origin does this diagram, this vegetation diagram, this tree diagram represent? Well, first of all, let's note that it's a totally interconnected tree. Totally interconnected tree, representing an idea about relationship. And what is that? The idea that what's related to what? Everything is related. Everything is related. Everything, if you go back far enough, you're going to find a common ancestor of everything. They'll always come back to where the branches will come together at some point as you go back in what time. Everything will have a common ancestor. Now let's move down to the other end of the spectrum, the idea that origins were 100% supernatural and in no way, no natural processes involved whatsoever. And what I do in class is this. I say, let me describe the idea to you, and you tell me what the diagram should look like. Let me point out first is we want to have the same axes we had down there. We want to have time and variation. Time and variation. And so here's the idea. The idea is sometime in the past, a supernatural being brought to be all species of life on Earth exactly the way they appear today. Brought in each species separately, separate beginning, separate origin, all species exactly the way they appear today. No changes whatsoever, ever, since these species came into being. All right, what would that diagram look like? Well, most students, at least a few students in the class, raise their hand and say, it'll be something like this, Professor. Let me get another color ink here. It would be vertical lines. Vertical lines. A, B, C, D. And so let me add something to it. Let me add a little circle representing supernatural activity. Supernatural activity. And what does this indicate? This diagram indicates, in contrast to the idea at the other end, it indicates that what is related to each other? Nothing is related. Nothing is related. Nothing is related. Nothing. And how much change since things came into being, species came into being? No change. No change. A very different idea than the other end of the spectrum. Now this idea actually has a name. Let's see. Let's give it a green. The idea at this end of the spectrum has a name. That name we've mentioned earlier. It's called fixity of species. Fixity of species. And what have we said about fixity of species? What did Darwin do to that idea? He wiped it out. It was a prominent idea prior to the time of Darwin that species were fixed. What does that mean? They never change. They never change. And so Mr. Darwin basically cleared out this end of the spectrum. Now, people didn't go all the way to the other end necessarily. Some did. Some just went part way, some farther. We'll talk about that in the next video. But right now, nobody's home. You don't believe that? Check it out. But the most ardent creationists are not pushing for fixity of species. They're pushing for something that's a little ways down here. And so, let's conclude this particular video at this point.